Hi, and welcome everyone to the Chicago Maritime Museum. I'm Denise Rowley from the Gail Borden Public Library, and I'm glad you're joining us today. This is exciting, on location. I'm here with Dylan Hoffmann of the Chicago Maritime Museum, just a kind of relatively new jewel in Chicago's museum campus, not museum campus, but you're down south. We're in Bridgeport, aren't we?
Excellent. Yeah, we're in Bridgeport. Thank you so much for visiting. The Chicago Maritime Museum opened here in Bridgeport in 2016, and we evolved from the Chicago Maritime Society, started in the early 1980s.
Right there. I have with me this beautiful canvas bag, which shows that we have a Pirate Island educational exhibit at the library right now. And that is one thing, when we're located in the Chicago Metro, the amount of museum partnerships that we've been able to connect with to bring another enhancement to our exhibits that we have at the library. We have a 24-foot long pirate ship in the middle of the library, but it's an interesting story, being that Chicago and its location and everything is based on waterways, and we sit on the Fox River making a pirate ship kind of a really nice add-on to a library that's sitting on the Fox River. And thank you so much for inviting us in to talk about the importance of waterways in Northern Illinois.
Yeah, we're a history museum with an educational focus, and we partner with other institutions as well, the libraries. We are Explore More Illinois partner for library passes, so we'll talk about that a little bit. But we're a history museum that tells the story of how Chicago evolved along the waterways, and really because of the waterways.
Oh, and we're standing in front of a bit of that story.
Yeah, so we start out here in the corridor of the museum, and we give really, like I said, a history of the waterways. And it starts in the early contact, 1673, when Joliet and Marquette, they paddled with their canoe looking for a passage to the great river, to the Mississippi, and they wanted to find really a passage all the way west to the Pacific Ocean, and that was the connection that established Chicago. They came from St. Ignace, and they paddled down through Green Bay on the Fox River of Wisconsin, not the Fox River of Illinois, down the Mississippi. When they returned, they went through the Illinois River to return, and they came upon the Chicago portage that was already used by natives. But Joliet discovered at that time, if you were able to connect the Lake Michigan to the Illinois River via a canal, then Chicago would become a great port that it eventually did.
And please, Dylan is going to be talking about a multitude of subjects. It's going to have wide interest for everyone, and we will take questions at the end. But I love it that you're mentioning the Fox River, because that's so important to where our library is located in Elgin. All right, we're going to walk inside now.
So the lobby was newly renovated, and this is really an introduction of what you're going to see throughout the entire tour at the museum. So we talk about Chicago, how it evolved as along the waterways, and that involved a lot of different engineering feats that were essential to supporting the population. The first over here is 1790. We're talking about establishing a harbor, and we feature the first permanent resident there, DeSalvo, and the harbor was actually, the main stem was covered by a sandbar. So in establishing a harbor, they had to cut through the sandbar and make it so that boats and ships could get through. As we go around the lobby next, you'll see the city starts to develop a lot more. You see a big transition, and that's after the opening of the I&M Canal. So the I&M Canal was dug by hand 96 miles from just north of us here in Bridgeport all the way out to LaSalle, Peru. And after that, ships, exactly what Joliet had initially thought of on his mission in 1673, that the ships would pass through, and commerce took off, and the port just really created a population boom. Moving along through history, then we talk over here how it's changed over time, and the Burnham Plan and recreation on the lakefront We also talk about more modern things today and establish things with recreation in other communities as well.
I think we're going to walk over here.
Yeah, we'll take a brief tour through the museum. So it starts in the early history, as we just talked about, and this over here is a map that I think you wanted me to point out and talk a little bit more about the actual waterways and the waterway system. So we're here in Chicago, obviously, and we'll talk about our location and why we picked that in Bridgeport. You'll get to see Bubbly Creek and things of that nature, but this is your Fox River, so not the Wisconsin Fox River. And your Fox River, I actually grew up on. I'm from McHenry. So it was the initial industrial development of the area. And one really cool aspect about the Fox River and things to see is the Illinois and Michigan Canal that we had talked about, which connected the Great Lakes to the Mississippi River. They had to find a way to get the canal to pass other rivers and other creeks. And the Fox River in Ottawa, the I&M Canal actually passes it on an aqueduct. And it's a really super cool feature that you can still check out today. The south end of the Illinois and Michigan Canal is a National Heritage Corridor, so the aqueduct still exists and you can go visit that.
And where is that aqueduct?
That's in Ottawa, Illinois, where the Fox River flows into the Illinois River.
And of course, another important part of the Fox River to the Elgin area is that we get our drinking water from the Fox River. So Aurora is another city that takes their water out of, I believe, the Fox as well.
Yeah.
So those, they're sustainable and sustaining type of resources for us.
Yeah. That's a perfect segue into our next character right here. This is Ellis Chessborough. So Ellis Chessborough helped design the sewer system in Chicago, which was essential in sustaining a population once the city started to grow. So because the city was very low and the population started to grow, the sewer was really an issue. It was fed by gravity, and our waste was really just run right into the rivers that fed into the lake, which is where we got our drinking water. So there were many engineering feats that we'll talk about along the way and how the city evolved through those to sustain our population.
And we will talk about the Fox
Yeah.
as we move along, and everyone knows the Fox, Jim Phillips, what role he played in probably the 1972 Clean Water Act. So, and it leads us to why some of our cities can take water out of the much more clean rivers that were part of the result of that act passage. So let's keep walking.
Yeah, we'll
This is,
continue
again,
on.
if
So,
you haven't been here, remember, Explore Illinois Pass will get you to the Chicago Maritime Museum in Bridgeport.
So some of the canoes here in this early history exhibit, we have a replica birch bark canoe made by Ralph Fries, who helped plan the tricentennial reenactment that Jim Phillips was a part of. So we have close to 100 canoes, kayaks, and dugouts. We're a small museum, but a lot of them are stored off-site. So we have a replica birch bark here, and then we have a dugout here. So a dugout is an actual trunk of a tree that was hollowed out and used to canoe. And this is an original 1900 Menominee dugout canoe, probably from the Wisconsin area, made of a cottonwood.
Did I read somewhere that they used to sink these to keep them malleable?
Yeah, that's a great point. So they would dry out. So over the winter, they would have to be preserved by keeping them wet, and a lot of times they would be held under a lake and under ice to keep wet.
Yeah, that's what I really like about this museum is the variety and the story. I think you have so much from the canoes to the ships that we're going to get to, but it offers a variety of what a story that the waterways and these ships and canoes have played in travel here.
Yeah. So this is the early history bay, and then we move forward to not only chapters in history, but also evolution of vessels. So this is human-powered, hand-propelled, And then when the canal opened, they used canal barges initially. The canal was built for transportation. So they would move barges down the Illinois and Michigan Canal. But one type of vessel that really evolved here in the Great Lakes was schooners. So schooners are fore and aft rigged, and they are really just evolved because of how they had a small crew. They were efficient. They could sail up into the wind, and they also had a shallow draft. We talked about how shallow the harbors were. You can see over here on these schooners how shallow the draft was, and they also had a center board where you could raise and lower that when you go into the harbor. They were used to carry goods, lumber. The lumber trade was big, and we'll see some Christmas tree ships later, even some really interesting things.
Yeah, please bear in mind, come to the library after the cruise ship is over. I think we're going to have another delightful surprise based on some of the Christmas trees that were transported from Wisconsin to Illinois.
Yeah, northern Wisconsin and Michigan as well. This is the David Dow's. So this was the biggest schooner at the time on the Great Lakes, a 5-masted schooner, a model of that as well. And the image back there you'll see is Rush Street in the 1860s. So once the canal opened in 1848, as I mentioned, the city just boomed, which led to traffic and congestion down in the city. The lumber schooners coming down and dropping off lumber here that would then move out on the canal out to the prairie where they didn't have trees. And then back east, grain would come as well on the canal.
So this is Canal Street, which is now...
This is Rush Street. This is downtown.
My. This is Rush Street.
Yeah, this is downtown.
The entertainment district
exactly,
of
yeah.
Chicago. Oh my, what a change.
So moving on, the schooners and the canal packets and boats on the canal to go from here in Bridgeport out to LaSalle, Peru was 22 hours. So a 22-hour trip. And then when the schooners were on the lakes, obviously they're dependent upon the wind, so you could have storms and it could take varying degree of time. So steamboats proved more efficient to carry passengers and goods. So this is our Steamship Bay here. We have a lot of kind of cool, significant ones to the Great Lakes that are unique. So these are called whaleback steamers. So they were developed on the lakes. This is the Christopher Columbus. So it almost looks like a submarine. It's kind of like a tube that was developed by McDougall, a shipbuilder up in Superior, Wisconsin. And this was the only one that was a passenger whaleback steamship. And it would carry people back and forth throughout the city.
Oh, it's fascinating to see how the travel by water changes through the years.
Yeah, so this is a really unfortunate incident that happened right downtown Chicago. So the Eastland Disaster was the deadliest disaster on the Great Lakes. In 1915, steamships were commissioned to take employees from the Western Electric Company to Michigan City, Indiana. And while they were docked in the harbor, the boat was overloaded and it already had issues with the improper ballast system, and the ship tipped over in the river and 844 people lost their lives in the disaster.
Oh my gosh. I think they have a lot more safety precautions today.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, what do we got here?
So this is a really cool ship propeller mold from the Calumet Shipyard in Dry Dock. So the early schooners were built by people like William Wallace Bates. He was a famous sailboat clipper schooner designer, but these are for more modern shipping. What happened was we saw that picture on Rush Street of how congested it was with the schooners. That had big implications downtown Chicago. You can see right there big modern bulk carrier barges trying to get through. Imagine being stuck in traffic waiting for that. So what happened was the port was moved down to Calumet on the south side of Chicago, the industrial port, to take on bigger ships once industrial development took off.
So Dylan, you're saying that like this looks like almost in modern times. I can see the Wrigley building there. They were bringing huge barges on the Chicago River right downtown to try and turn corners there.
Yeah, and it eventually, became an issue that gradually over time, everything started shifting down to Calumet, and that's where the industrial port is now. We have a lot of shipbuilding history in the city, so this kind of ties into our next bay, which is the Lakes of War. So on the south branch, we had, on the south side of Chicago, we have places like the Calumet Shipyard, and then the north branch, we have the Greeby Shipyard as well. So they made a lot of really interesting vessels. So Greeby on the north side made big wooden yachts and also minesweepers for the Navy in World War II. And on the south side in Calumet, they made what's called distribution box boats, which hooked up mines. So it's kind of interesting. At the same time in World War II, on the north side, they were making minesweepers, and on the south side, making boats that help hook up mines. This is one of our really fascinating models. This is an aircraft carrier called the Wolverine. So in the war, we were worried about possibly getting attacked from the East Coast or the West Coast, so they thought it would be best to train in the middle of the country. So they took two old coal sidewheel steamships and they converted them to the aircraft carriers Wolverine and Sable, and you can see a picture of them up there at Navy Pier. And they trained over 15,000 pilots to learn how to fly for the Navy, and they went out to war. So a lot of people think that there's only ships as shipwrecks, but there's over 100 planes that have been lost in the lake as well.
It's particularly appropriate, as we're going to have Veterans Day coming up, that we're talking about this. Again, very proud that Chicago was so part of supporting the troops during World War II.
Yeah.
And how quickly people changed.
Yeah.
You know, the transition between I'm a shipbuilder of this kind to now I'm supporting the military.
Yeah.
And what? Oh, the next exhibit looks really, really interesting. The Christmas tree ships.
Yeah, so we have a seasonal exhibit on the Christmas tree ships over here, and this one is on the Rouse Simmons in particular. That was the quintessential Christmas tree ship. So lumber schooners at the end of the year, they tried to squeak out the last trip as they could and go as late in the year as possible. And on their return trip, the last one in the season, they would bring Christmas trees, and then they would dock in the river and sell them to people right from the deck of the boat. And the Rouse Simmons was led by Captain Schooners, who was known as Captain Santa, and it was really a family affair. They docked in the river, and they would sell Christmas trees, even give them away to churches and things like that. Well, the ship ended up going down in a gale in November and in 1912, and it was lost just off of two rivers in Wisconsin. And we have an awesome model of it here. I know you guys are library people, so I pulled a lot of different resources. We have a lot of really cool old newspaper clippings and some books to check out. The museum does have a library, so we have many books available for researchers in all different aspects of Chicago maritime history. So the early history, as we mentioned, the schooners, the canal, the lakes at war. So you can stop by at any time and sit in here and read some of our books and request different materials.
Oh, you know, that's near and dear to our heart.
Yeah, definitely.
The resources. That's the one thing that we always think is fascinating about exhibits is you get somebody interested, and then where do you go from here? And again, we have a lot of books and materials and DVDs for people to check out once you get interested in the subject. So seeing this here, I think you're doing it a fabulous way when you have an ability for people who want to do further research to just get into it. And so, can they check it out from you, or how does this work?
We are just on-site research for now, so
Okay.
if you could, if you're really interested in something, it helps to kind of call ahead and let me pull resources and find out what you need, and then I can help you out. But yeah, we have a library, and we have archives, photographs, a lot of kind of cool things related to, as I said, each chapter of a maritime history in Chicago.
Oh, fabulous. What a jewel this is.
Yeah.
And so we're going to move on to something that's
Yeah,
near.
when you come to the Maritime Museum, you want to see water, right? Well, this is why we're here in Bridgeport. So we are on the South Fork of the South Branch of the river, which is also known infamously as Bubbly Creek. So when the stockyards were here in Chicago, they were just south of us, and the stockyards were the hog butcher capital of the world, and you didn't eat the entire animal, so the entrails and bones and carcasses were all dumped in. They didn't have the regulations that we have today. So if you've read another book, The Jungle by Upton St. Clair, you know a little bit more about the stockyards in Bubbly Creek. But what I like about it is it makes our story still relevant today. So you talked about drinking water out on the Fox, and and we talked a little bit about Ellis Chessborough in the front. We're in the process of developing a new exhibit here on the history of the river, but a lot of this ties into that initial system with a combined water and rainwater and sewer system, where when we get a lot of rain, it really has no place to go. It fills up our sewers, and that's why the TARP program was developed. Just underneath that bridge there, that's 35th Street, is the Racine Avenue pumping station. And when we get a lot of rain, the Racine Avenue pumping station has to relieve that stress, and they still dump sewage into the river. So the Fox, Jim Phillips, he wouldn't be too happy about that.
Yeah, and one thing I probably should have brought up at the beginning, but you were an educator before you were a curator. And talk about the synergy between your prior career to being a curator here.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of fun. I mean, we try to service all audiences of the community and get kids involved. And like I said, that's one aspect of it now, is the kids are going to be our future generation of engineers. And we still have a lot of these issues, and climate change is an issue where we're getting more heavy rains and more rainstorms. And things of that nature, and disasters. So we're hoping that in this museum, this history museum, kids can look here and get inspiration and new ideas of careers along the waterways and things to do to kind of help the community and be involved in maritime history.
Awesome, awesome. And so you just made mention of where we're going next, which is a story of cleaning up the water. We're going over to the area that talks about the Fox, who was very instrumental in cleaning up the Fox River. There were so many stories where he was an activist.
Yeah, I wanted to provide a connection to where you guys are from. So the Fox River.
Should we move further?
Yeah, Jim Phillips was known as the Fox, and he participated in the tricentennial reenactment. So initially, when we first started, we talked about 1673, the Joliet Marquette expedition. In 1973, Jim Phillips was part of that reenactment that used this canoe right here on display at the Maritime Museum. So this is a 20-foot long replica built by Ralph Fries, a replica birch bark canoe made out of fiberglass. And they took this canoe on that 4-month journey, 4 months of paddling from St. Ignace down the Fox River in Wisconsin, Mississippi, and then back up. And along the way, Jim Phillips, who was also a former teacher, would stop, and he was the environmentalist that would give talks about the waterways and about environmental issues as well. He also served as comedy relief. He was a bigger gentleman, and they called him, he was Pierre, but they called him the snowflake, the little snowflake as well, and provided some comedy relief.
Oh, what a significant person in the history of cleaning up the river and the waterways. And you brought some other
I pulled some other
here.
resources as well. Like I said, we have a large collection of many different items. Ralph Fries, who helped plan this and also build the canoe that was used in the reenactment, he donated his canoe collection to the museum and also a lot of resources. One of them that is probably my favorite is this, which is a comic book called Tales of the Fox. And this comic book details Jim Phillips' adventures and all of the things that he did as far as cementing corporate sewage waste pipes and all of that stuff as well. So really awesome thing there to feature and to highlight. So a lot of cool things.
Oh, well, thank you so much for this brief tour. And again, your address is where?
Yeah, we're at 1200 West 35th, and this south side of the museum is used for events and for community engagement. We just had a big one with Friends of the Chicago River and a planning commission. We are inside of the Bridgeport Arts Center, which the third Friday of every month we have open house, so it's free from 7 to 10 at night. And this Friday actually is the third Friday, so we're featuring Valerie Van Tyne. She's going to give a history talk on the history of the Coast Guard, so that will be pretty interesting and awesome as well.
Oh, definitely, definitely. So now it's a time where we would ask, do we have any questions? And I'm going to, we do have a question. Let me check this out. Are there any shipwrecks right off the coast of Chicago?
Yeah, there are many shipwrecks right off the coast of Chicago. So the David Dow's, that huge sail ship we talked, the five-masted schooner. The Lady Elgin, there's a lot of shipwrecks that were lost, and airplanes, as I mentioned. A lot of different things on the lake. So yeah, there's many shipwrecks all over, but Chicago is no exception. There's even some in the river, and the canal boats have been lost. I mean, basically everywhere there is water, there was a vessel at some point around here that has been lost, and a lot of them are still on the bottom of the lake.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to ask you about is our exhibit is Pirate Island. Mm-hmm. Did we have any pirates on on Lake Michigan? So we sit on Chicago sits on Lake Michigan.
Yeah, Dan Seavey was a pirate as such in northern Michigan and Wisconsin. He is known as a famous pirate on the Great Lakes that did pirate activities, mostly going into harbors at night and stealing things. That was the biggest thing. So they also had Chicago River pirates, they called them, which essentially did the same thing. They would just wait till ships were docked up at night, and then they would sneak onto them and steal things and leave, or steal from stores or residents and take off as well. So there were some pirates. Seavey is one to look up. But
okay.
Yeah.
And the other question I had going around the corner, when you were talking about careers in maritime and maybe even located in the Chicago area, what type of things are we talking about there?
Well, there's many things. I mean, many things to do involved in the waterways. That's kind of one cool thing about our mission. So there's education, so a lot of different things like that, history education. There's recreation, so there's, even if you're not getting paid for it, there's a lot of opportunities in Chicago to get on the waterways and also help others get on the waterways as well. But then there's Coast Guards like that we're going to be talking about as well. There's engineering careers that are involved with waterways and things like that. So there's a lot of different things to do and a lot of different ways to get involved. So we hope you come down and check it out.
Oh, awesome. And so I'm going to use, if there's no more questions, is there any more questions? We thank you so much for delighting us with all of what this, just a sampling probably of what this museum has to offer. And I want to present you a little gift from us, and this features our Pirate Island that goes on through January 16th at the Gilborden Public Library. That's 270 North Grove, Elgin, Illinois, and of course our website's on here, gilborden.info. But thank you so much for just highlighting so much of this wonderful thing that makes the Chicago area and Elgin so part of the Waterways story.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the visit, and look forward to seeing more of you in the future.
Oh, great. Thanks.